This is Top of Mind, the Dr. Patrick Slowinski Show.
Welcome to Top of Mind. Today we're bringing you a special episode dedicated to Poland, featuring two incredible guests with unique perspectives on the country's past and present. Here to introduce them is Dr. Patrick Slowinski.
I'm just super excited for this episode because the two gentlemen that you all see here with me tonight are not only experts on Poland and Central Europe, but dear friends of mine from the Foreign Service. We worked together. John Grondelski and I had the reputation of being called the two Polish guys in the office that we worked in. And I think we both took that as a compliment. John and I worked on Polish issues, and Matt was our boss, who has a great love for Poland, as you can see the signs behind him. We'll start with Matt Boyse, a senior fellow with the Hudson Institute, the Center on Europe and Eurasia, specializing in Central Europe. He's a former senior Foreign Service officer, and he served all over Washington, Europe, Canada, and of course, Poland. He also was our boss, as I mentioned, as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs. He's known widely for his work and his work and his writing that he does on Central Europe, particularly Poland. So that's why I thought I want to bring him over here with us tonight. So Matt, thank you for that. And he is also, as I mentioned, a member of the Ben Franklin Fellowship, one of the founding members. And then John Grondelski, so we got a couple Polish names here, as I mentioned, one of the two Polish guys, is a retired Foreign Service officer who served in Warsaw, senior Poland desk officer, deputy director for Central Europe. Like me, he's of Polish-American descent, or polskiego pochodzenia, as we say. And prior to the State Department, he worked in higher education, and he's being quite modest. It is Dr. John Grondelski, who has a PhD in theology and knows a lot about religion, Catholicism in particular, and has done extensive writing and translating of a whole bunch of great things. When John used to come to visit with me in Krakow, he would always seek out these little bookstores and get really hard to find books. And I think he ended up translating a bunch of them. So John and Matt, welcome to the show. We just had a huge election in Poland, and I was a nervous wreck. I think I felt just about as bad as I did with the recent election with President Trump, although I thought President Trump had a much better chance to win that election than I did with Karol Nawrocki. So for those of you who don't know, the newly elected president of Poland, his name is Karol, not Carol, but Karol. I guess you can call him Carol. Karol Nawrocki, and he defeated Rafał Trzaskowski. So yes, you all have to practice saying those names. But it was important for many reasons. And first, I'm going to set the scene for both of you. When I was a little kid, we knew about where the word Poland came from. So in Polish, the word for Poland is Polska. Now, maybe some of you have seen Polska kielbasa. It's also an adjective that means Polish, but it's also a noun that means Poland. And it comes from the root pola, which means field. So Poland's like a big field, but it has so many other things to it than just a very rich and storied agricultural history. It has a mountain region. It's right next to the Baltic Sea. It has, unfortunately, Russia still on top of its head in Kaliningrad, has some great neighbors on the east and west, and just sitting there with about what is the number today, John? Over 40 million people in Poland, right?
No, actually in the 30s, the population's been declining.
Down a little bit.
Yeah.
So close, 38, 39, something around there?
Yeah.
Is that including the Ukrainian immigrants, which is over 1 million?
No.
Okay. So a rich history. I just remember that Karol Nawrocki, I was turning on the news when the campaign was going on, and I was like, he's never really run for office as much as I could see. I thought, does this guy really have a chance? And then he went and he said something that really resonated with me. He said, Polski rolnik, polskie pole, polski chleb na polskim stole. And that basically means, a Polish farmer, Polish fields, Polish bread on a Polish table. And he just really resonated with farmers and the rural class of Poland, which is still very important in the electorate. But I got to tell you, I thought that we might see a Poland go very globalist, very liberal toward the EU and kind of away from traditional conservative with the negative aspect that some of the liberals have with the Catholic Church. So with that, I want to start with Matt. Matt, you've been in Central Europe. You just got back. Thank you for coming back. Maybe give us a little flavor of your trip. And then what you think about, first of all, our first subject is, what do you think about the election? Were you surprised? And then what does it mean for Poland? And then we'll move from what does it mean for Poland to Europe, to NATO, and then to the United States. So let's start with that, Matt.
Okay, well, thank you, Patrick, for the invitation. Great to see you, and great to see John. You guys both represented the best of the old Foreign Service, where people who were the desk officer for X, Y, and Z were deeply schooled in the countries that you were responsible for, and that is not as common these days as it used to be. So we really benefited from your unbelievable knowledge about the country, because especially since it's such an important country. But I just got back literally today from Central Europe, and in fact, I was in Munich at the time when the election was announced, the results were announced, and my German interlocutors were not very pleased with the outcome, because of course they wanted the other outcome. They wanted Rafał Trzaskowski. I had been in the Czech Republic, I'd been in Hungary, I'd been in Romania, I'd been in Slovakia, and there was more interest in Karol Nawrocki. But in any case, the point is that it really does. There were the two camps. There was the sort of the pro-EU camp, which was very much focused on Trzaskowski and very much wanted him to win, and were putting their fingers on the scale. And through all sorts of kind of subtle and not so subtle, expressions of support. And because they, of course, saw Trzaskowski as the candidate who was sort of very pro-EU, would never sort of challenge the EU in terms of what it sought for member states. Whereas Karol Nawrocki he's not anti-EU. He just believes more in a certain line. There's a certain point at which the EU competencies end and Polish sovereignty begins, and there's a clearer line there. So the way this election was cast for the outside world, people who don't understand Poland or who think in simplistic categories, it was very much of a pro-EU versus Eurosceptic, and of course some people actually mischaracterize. I mean, Politico mischaracterized Nawrocki as pro-Russia. Absurd. He's not pro-Russia at all. He's being characterized as far right. There are all sorts of sort of labels that have been applied to him that are kind of pejorative. And then, of course, Trzaskowski being the good guy, so to speak. This is in the eyes of much of the European media, and much of the Polish media, by the way, as well. That was really, sort of in for him. And so you had this sort of these sort of the pro-EU and then the kind of the more. Nawrocki is not anti-EU. He just believes that that Poland is a member in good standing with the EU, but Poland should. There's a point at which Poland signed up for A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and it didn't sign up for H, I, J, K, L, and whatever. You see, but with this ever deeper union and that sort of the mission creep that you have in so much of the EU, they just were sort of pushing back and say, okay, thank you very much. This is where we're in charge, and thank you, and we'll take it from there. And so that's the way it was being cast. The Germans were my interlocutors there were very disappointed because, of course, not only did they want the pro-EU candidate to win, but they also wanted Nawrocki is a bit more of not exactly a sort of pro-German because, of course, he represents his former job prior to becoming a candidate was as the head of this Institute for National Memory, which of course deals with all the a lot of the ugliness that has happened in Poland over the centuries, but most probably much of it in the 20th century. And of course, the Nazi Germany was responsible for enormous suffering, and so he obviously represents that sort of element in Poland, which is a very strong element. And of course, it's something that a lot of Germans would rather not dwell on too much, because it then is connected with things like reparations, et cetera. So
Right.
anyway, so this was this way it was being cast, and of course you had you had this, these two camps with a lot of fingers sort of being put on the scale for the pro-EU candidate. And so Nawrocki.
But in fairness, Matt, I have to interject here. What about the argument that President Trump really put his finger on the scale to invite Nawrocki, candidate for the first time to the Oval Office? So
Yeah,
do you think
he
that's
did.
fair? All is fair in politics?
Well, he did, but then of course, Barack Obama and John Kerry turned up in Poznan and put their fingers on the scale for Tchaikovsky. So what we're now finding is that actually what used to not be so common, which in other words, this sort of this active involvement in other campaigns, is now becoming more of a thing. I mean, you have, British Labour Party activists campaigning for Kamala Harris. You have people tweeting their support, politicians in other countries or even prime ministers tweeting their support for various candidates in the United States. So what you have is this phenomenon of people making their views known about about what is essentially internal affairs of other countries, and is becoming much more of a thing. In this case, there was a lot of it. There was, I would say, much more on the pro Tchaikovsky side than on the pro Nawrocki side, but there was something on both. You're right.
Yeah,
So there.
let me take it over to John,
Yeah.
and there's times here, and we'll get right back to it because there's so much I want to talk about. John, you've had your ear to, like me, both being with our last names, kind of give it away. I grew up in Milwaukee. You grew up in New Jersey, in both Polish communities. John went on to marry a wonderful woman from Poland. What are you hearing from the Polish community in the United States? And he just wrote a great article on it as well, so I kind of know what he thinks about the election. But what are you hearing from your sources, both in the United States, which a lot of people that have Polish citizenship that were living in the United States were able to vote in the election. John, what are you hearing about them and about back home for your wife in Poland? And what are you hearing?
Well, I think it's interesting that Polish citizens who live abroad in the diaspora can vote at their local embassy or consulate. And that happened in the United States as it did in Western Europe. And when those votes go into a national pool, they also go into a pool, for example, to elect a member of parliament. And the outcome in the United States and in Canada was that Nawrocki won, which was a marked contrast to Polish communities in other countries. Polish communities in Western Europe largely came out on Trzaskowski's side. It was very narrow in the UK, but nevertheless, Trzaskowski's side won there. But Polish Americans, Polish Canadians, and Polish Bosnian Herzegovinians came out in favor of Karol Nawrocki, the winning candidate. I think if we look at this election from a very European perspective, then some people would like to turn it into a referendum on the EU. I think that is one factor in the election, but I think the other factors are much deeper, which is that Poland, like most countries in the West, is in the middle of a certain cultural war, and those societies are very much divided, very much polarized, almost split down the middle. If you look at the Polish election, when it comes to the things that are really essential in foreign policy for Poland, which is the United States-Polish alliance, there's no real debate there. That is a consensus that is so broad and so strong that even the people who used to be communists before 1989 support the U.S. Polish relationship. Where the difference comes in is in the cultural issues and how those cultural issues are advocated by institutions that have a certain global reach, such as the EU. And that's where I think the main fault lines came. So I was not surprised by the fact that this election was as close as it was. We are living in Western societies, in the United States, in Poland, in Italy, in Germany, where there is a very real split in what are the essential values that animate a country. And we saw that in the outcome here, which was 50.8% versus 49 point some percent, 10 million votes on each side, 350,000 split between winner and loser.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And I see so many similarities between what we've experienced in our election in 2016 and again in 2024, although President Trump's advantage was much greater the second time around. But I was watching social media as the Polish returns were coming in, and it was quite a dichotomy of meltdowns and joys, especially since the little nuance of Poland, doing their the post, what do you call them? When you ask people who they voted for. I just lost
exit poll.
The exit polls. Well, that really, and then you have Trzaskowski and his wife celebrating and people celebrating. And then I couldn't help myself because one of my friends from Poland said, "Yes, we're going to win. This is it." And I said, "Well, it's not over." And it wasn't over by any means. And it turned around a 1 percentage point. John, you said it right. 350,000 voter difference for a country of 38 million or so, 39.
Well, I was in with a bunch of Poles at various conferences in Hungary, Czech Republic, and Romania, and they were all actually most of them were the ones that I actually saw were most of them were on the law and justice side, and they were actually quite confident they would win. And the reason they were is because they said that Polish polls chronically undercount the conservative vote. And so they said,
where we heard that before.
Their experience was that, okay, they were very chill. Because at that point, Trzaskowski was leading, although the gap had been closing. But they were actually quite confident, or appeared quite confident on the outside that this would turn out in their favor, and it did. Even though it was a bit of a squeaker, but I mean, so was the election that produced Andrzej Duda's victory, as well. So I mean, so these votes are close, and they have traditionally been quite close. So this is more of the same, and that tendency of, as John was describing, the very, very split societies. And so we're seeing this, but what's interesting in this case is that, given the amount of support that was coming down on Trzaskowski's side, and the fact that the Tusk government had actually denied him denied the Nawrocki campaign electoral funds, and were trying to wrap Nawrocki in so many controversies that had sort of come up at the last minute, whose provenance you never really were quite sure about, and et cetera. So given all the weight of against him, the fact that he still won was really quite amazing.
Yeah,
he's from somebody who's actually who was a museum director 6 months ago, and you watch him. He came into Hudson right after his meeting with the president, or the following day, and he's not you can tell he's not a politician who's been a politician for decades like Trzaskowski's been, or for many years. He's got a lot of talent, a lot of raw talent. He's had a very steep learning and makes a very good impression. But he's not a practiced politician who's been practicing his lines for years and years and years and years, and has that kind of that spiel down. And so it really was quite impressive when you consider the forces that were arrayed against him and how fresh he is. I think a lot of the discontent was, first of all, actually there was a lot of pro kind of the description that John's description about what's happening in Polish society, and sort of that there still is a rather substantial support for more of what he stands for. But it was also, I think, reflective of a lot of discontent in the Tusk government, and because Trzaskowski was so wrapped, so close to Tusk, and that's all part of the same political family, he actually probably did not benefit from some of the support that Tusk has been losing over the last year or so, and that probably weakened his performance, the outcome for him.
Well, now that I got you here, Matt, I wanted to take I would just say to wrap up what
let me just throw in one thing
go
with
ahead.
Matt's observation. It's true that exit polls in Poland are typically somewhat skewed, but also the other factor that affects exit polls in Poland is that the pollsters are lazy. They don't go out of Warsaw, Krakow, and the big cities. They certainly don't go to the villages. They don't go to what we call Polska B, Eastern Poland, which is largely rural, which delivered a huge electoral majority for Nawrocki. The other thing that I would add, you mentioned the squeaker in 2020 when Duda was elected president. Let's not forget that Duda ran against Trzaskowski. One would think that if Trzaskowski is such a refined and experienced politician, he's had 5 years to figure out how to put his campaign together. And some of the mistakes that he made suggested that he was coasting on his laurels.
Right. And I think the interference with the media, that Matt, you touched on this. I mean, Nawrocki was for so many people a kibol, right? A soccer hooligan, right? So he was, he had, I guess, in his history, some not so flattering episodes with around football matches, nicotine addictions. I mean, they really went after him. The smear campaign was pretty intense, as you mentioned. And I do get a sense from my friends in Germany that it did carry over to the quite fairly large Polish population still living in Germany that still voted. Whether they found that made him more like Trump. Tell me about the comparisons between Nawrocki and Trump. And then also, Matt, I want you to kick us off on what is the EU, what are they going to do with Poland now? Because Poland's already been a thorn in their backside. Every EU meeting you see, there's some Polish MP just letting them have it. So give me your thoughts on that.
I mean, the headlines that I was seeing in Germany and or in the English press, for example, were from the EU perspective, was more this was going to, quote, weaken Poland's position within the EU. Because, of course, it means that there will be this cohabitatia, the cohabitation of two political camps, and there will be deadlock or stalemate or whatever. It'll be gridlock. There'll be the way the position of the president is sufficiently strong that he can block a lot of activity or obstruct it, and so, or slow it down, et cetera. So that means that the pro-EU agenda of the Tusk government will be slowed or blocked. And of course, that's something that the EU does not want to see, because they're hoping to make all sorts of reforms in the next period. And so, whether this strengthens or weakens, I mean, Poland's position. I mean, of course, the EU would want a totally all-in EU where Poland, where if when the EU says jump, the Polish government would say how high. That's not going to happen. Instead, there will be, the democratic process is at work, because Poland is not 100% in favor of the EU agenda right now, which with all of its facets. So I see that as just an expression of a vibrant Polish democracy. And so, I mean, that's just if you believe in the EU, then and you wish to see it, sort of get ever larger and ever deeper, etc., then this will, be not the greatest thing when you add it up with Slovakia and Hungary and some of the other, sort of Eurosceptic elements in the EU. But if you believe that this EU should continue as a union of sovereign states, well, then this is fine.
Yeah, no, amazing times. I do think there are a lot of parallels between President Trump and Nawrocki in a sense. I mean, clearly Nawrocki's not a billionaire and wasn't a political or a cultural icon as Donald Trump was. But he still was an outsider. He still came in, ran as an independent. Peace took him in. Just an amazing kind of story that way. But then we also have similar elements of things that are important to us in the United States that are important in Poland that I think determine the election: migration. One of the biggest ones. If you listen to the member of parliament, Dominik Tarczyński, he just says we want zero illegal migrants coming in. He stresses illegal versus legal and says we don't want them coming in. We don't. If you're illegal, there's a good chance you're going to get shot at the Belarusian border. Now, that's harsh language for a lot of people, but there are those people in Poland that really have seen what happened in Germany, what's happened in France. They don't want it repeating in Poland. So I'll go to you first, Matt, and then over to John. Migration, what role did it play in the Polish outcome in the election?
I would say rather significant, along with some of the other kind of, the sort of the progressive agenda that the EU represents, and that is embodied in Trzaskowski and his whole kind of persona, which is very much of an urban progressive ethos, and something which resonates among, in certain urban areas, but doesn't reverberate as it still doesn't reverberate deeply throughout the country, and even in larger cities is also there's a substantial percentage of the voters that doesn't actually endorse that either. So it's a very so migration, but along with the green agenda and with some of the progressive issues that we sometimes subsumed under the kind of this woke concept. Those are things that don't resonate very very highly in Poland. On the other hand, I mean the added to some of the foreign policy areas are also the parties are much closer, both very strongly Russo-skeptic, in other words, very anti-Putin and anti-Russian and very disturbed, very pro-Ukrainian. Although with the Nawrocki case, a little bit more focus on some of the ugliness that happened between, in 1943 and the Volhynia, sort of case, and the number of Polish citizens who lost their lives at the hands of Ukrainian partisans. So there's a little bit of a wrinkle there with Ukraine, but otherwise, these are very, 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 kind of people who are very concerned about developments in Russia, both parties, and in the case of Nawrocki, very Atlanticist, Trzaskowski, Atlanticist, but much more. I think you get the impression that Trzaskowski, for him, the most important foreign policy partner is Brussels. And then, maybe Germany, and then maybe the United States in that order. It's sort of they will of course say that the United States is their most important partner, but I'm not so sure about that. In the case of Trzaskowski, in the case of Nawrocki, I am, and so you just have difference of the many kind of big partners you have. Without question, Law and Justice, I think, prioritizes the relationship with the United States. With Trzaskowski, it's obvious. I think they prioritize the EU, and then Germany is way, way up there in terms of its partners. With Nawrocki, it's less. So, yeah.
John, I want to take a little bit of a turn because you are our resident expert on theology. I read a few of the comments because it's just fun as a psychologist to kind of read people's comments after an emotional event, right? And so some of them, and these were all in Polish, these were people living in Poland, some that I knew, some that I didn't know. And many of them were blaming both the Catholic Church and President Trump for taking away their democracy. So why don't you give us a little bit of flavor of the role of the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church in Poland, and to what extent do you think the Catholic Church played a role in the outcome, if any?
Well, I've been also following what people have been saying on social media, and I'm honestly debating at this point whether it's AI or they've hired somebody to translate Democratic National Committee talking points into Polish so that they can be deployed by online social media folks, because it's the same arguments. Of course, it's all the uneducated rubes and baskets of deplorables in the villages that are voting for Nawrocki and have taken away our democracy and women's rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Look, 35 years ago, the Catholic Church in Poland was the place that protected all democratic elements, including all those democratic elements that today would like to spit on her. But it was the one free place that you could gather outside of the party. Almost as soon as 1989 came about, there was a certain faction within the so-called democratic camp that decided that Poland, if it held to its Catholic identity, if it held to the Judeo-Christian values that come from that, somehow Poland would become a państwo wyznaniowe, a confessional state where church and state are unlawfully blended and take away people's rights. That's in the United States, when liberals want to scare people, they bring out the boogeyman of taking away Social Security. In Poland, when the left wants to scare people, they talk about the confessional state taking away people's rights. It's a lot of hogwash. I don't think the church played an enormous role in this election, other than to say, when it comes to issues that have a moral consequence to them, for example, the abortion debate in Poland, candidate Nawrocki stands here and candidate Trzaskowski stands there. The fact
In the
that
middle of the debate, John, I don't know if you watched the debate where Nawrocki brought a rainbow flag right over to Trzaskowski's podium.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's you see the same thing in the United States. Politicians who, will use code words in order to signal where they stand on things without calling things by name. If our candidate for governor in Virginia talks about choice and reproductive freedom one more time without mentioning the abortion word in that, this is the way you hope you will not alienate some people while signaling to your friends, hey, I'm with you. And I think the same thing was going on in Poland. And I think conservatives are finally realizing that you need to stop playing defense and need to start playing offense.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there with the influence of Catholic Church. I think anyone who's been to Poland and gone to a Catholic church for Mass, especially in the villages, these are communities, tight communities that do really have their values, and they work hard together to maintain those values. Poland in particular is a country that does everything with its history to try to preserve its language, its culture, its faith. So it wasn't surprising to me that people would make that assumption. However, I've lived in Poland like you have and like Matt has, and I've never felt that the Catholic Church was impeding on my life. But it is another talking point that they use. Matt, I want to shift over. Go ahead, John.
I would make one observation there that I think influences this. The church never was able to marry altar and throne in the 20th century in Poland in the same way that, let's say, even in Russia, you have between Vladimir Putin and his altar boy, Patriarch Kirill, the communism just didn't make that possible. The church's influence could only be moral, could only be persuasive. It could not be politically imposed. But I think a lot of Poles also, we talk about the EU. a lot of Poles, I think, looked at what has happened to Ireland and say, here is a country that has long reveled in its Catholic identity and uh, its defense of its allegiance to Rome, etc., etc. And within 20 years, we have seen Ireland go so globally woke as to be unrecognizable with what it was. And when we see Irish today standing up in Dublin having protests against illegal immigration or the arrival of asylees from all over Europe, Poles are saying, we don't want to be in that league.
No, I think that's fair. Matt, we're getting close here, so I want to shift gears a little bit and your thoughts on the election results and how that it affects Poland's relationship with NATO and the EU.
I mean, I don't think it's going to change much with regard to NATO, because I mean, Nawrocki he will just be a continuation of the Duda approach, because the Polish president does have significant foreign policy powers. What's going to be interesting to watch is whether this whole paralysis between the naming and kind of formally designating of ambassadors continues, because there's a paralysis that's gone, because the Polish president has to approve all of the nominations, and since there's a dispute between the foreign ministry and the presidency, that this means that Poland is not actually being represented by ambassadors abroad in many countries. It's being represented by chargés d'affaires, who are not formally recognized by the host government, as well as because they're not formally named by the president of Poland. So there'll be so the Polish ambassador to NATO will actually be a chargé d'affaires, which of course is, if I mean, you might think this is not a big deal, or should we say some people might think this is not a big deal, but actually it is actually a little bit of a deal, because it means that the person does not have the full weight of the country behind him or her. And so I mean, even though the functional kind of weight of Poland will be similar, or for all practical, pretty much the same, there will be that little distinction that wouldn't be the case otherwise, I think. So I mean, I would expect it to be largely the same with that little wrinkle in as far as NATO is concerned. And it also may actually apply also to the United States too, because the chargé in Washington is, the ambassador is really, actually, he's not the ambassador, he's the chargé. And of course, he represents the Tusk option. And so the question is maybe whether he will continue, or because over time, it might actually, the government might find it not advantageous to have a chargé in all these important places, NATO, whatever, US, Kyiv, and all these other places where there were used to be ambassadors, but they're now been downgraded to chargés because of this dispute between the two camps. And so, and of course, that will probably also be true with Europe, with the EU.
Yeah, the EU basically, it's no secret for us who have lived there. There's not a lot of love lost between Germany and Poland on many aspects, and that's just been a continuing saga. I do think that it's a great opportunity, though, for Poland to continue to exercise leadership on Ukraine. So let's talk a little bit as we wrap things up for tonight. You read things that a Nawrocki victory means that, of course, the lie that he's in Putin's pocket somehow, and now this is a great thing for Putin. But I'll say that I was actually the consul general there when Russia decided to invade Ukraine, and I was in Krakow. And so I was right literally on the border when all the refugees were coming. So I don't think most Poles or Polish Americans have any doubt who started that war and who's to blame, including Nawrocki. So that's just nonsense. But there is a bit of Ukraine fatigue. And there's also the kind of historical fear of Russia doing something very unpredictable with nuclear weapons. I think it's a I thought we just, we have Sikorski over there, and we have a lot of history of Polish officials kind of, talking about that issue, and then the continuous fear of what is Russia going to do. So I think for our last few minutes, I'll get you started, Matt, with that. That does have kind of a NATO flavor to it, of course, but also I think we take a step back first to that the Polish president doesn't have as much power as an American president has per se. Their parliamentary system. So the prime minister is Donald Tusk, and he's been around for a long time, liberal, and he's over there. We don't know how much longer he's going to stay there, but he's there for now. And so I wanted our listeners to know that you do have this dichotomy of a conservative president coming in, but still a liberal majority for now in the parliament.
Right, and that's a kind of a that is a really kind of it's a big divide, and of course there'll be a vote of no confidence, a vote of confidence next Wednesday, I guess the 11th, and so it'll be see how that happens. Whether because the governing majority or the is not enormous, and there may be some grouchiness on the part of some of the MPs, but we'll see how that goes.
John, what do you think? Ukraine, is there going to be a big policy shift so far on supporting Ukraine as much as Poland can?
No, I don't think that there would be a big policy shift in Poland. The war in Ukraine and the violation of Ukrainian sovereignty, is very apparent to Poland, and Poland knows what the geography of the region looks like. Matt brought up the question of the historical baggage that lies between Poland and Ukraine. I think it will possibly become more evident in an Nawrocki administration than it would have been under a Tusk or Trzaskowski government. Part of that is that Nawrocki is a historian, and therefore, his Institute of National Memory is not just simply a group of historians sitting around writing books. They have a double mandate. Their mandate is to maintain the historical record, but also to pursue criminal accountability for crimes against Poles by totalitarian regimes. They did the kinds of things in Poland that, let's say, the Department of Justice did in the United States when it came to going after ex-Nazis living in Cleveland. And Poland, you have to remember, was invaded in 1939 by two countries, not by one. It wasn't just Germany, but it was the Soviet Union. And for 80 years, the history of the East had been snuffed under, whether it was because the big three didn't want to disturb Allied unity, or whether under communism, nothing bad ever came from the East, or after 1990, don't raise historical baggage that will upset the wonderful world where America is the only essential power. Matt mentions 1943-44. 100,000, 120,000 Poles in eastern Poland, in what is Ukrainian territory today, were killed, but they were killed in very brutal ways. They weren't just, rounded up and shot. They were burned alive. They were hatchet murdered, etc. And no accountability has ever come from them. What I think bothers Poles is that, in contrast, in Germany, you at least have an admission, we did something wrong. Something went wrong here, that we produced a government called the Third Reich that was able to perpetrate these sorts of crimes. There is no comparable taking of account from the East, either from the Ukraine or certainly from Vladimir Putin, who is just installed Joseph Stalin's statue in the Moscow metro. So, yeah, the fact that the East needs to also take account of the less than attractive parts of their history is, I think, something that Nawrocki would hold them to account about.
Mm-hmm. Matt, I'm going to give you the last word here on, and my question, my prompt for you is, we've got this election behind us. We've got the Liberals still, for now, in charge of the parliament, and you have a new conservative president coming in. What do you see for Poland and its relationship with the U.S. in particular?
I see actually a lot of continuity there, because the presidency remains in the hands of a conservative figure. And Duda had a very close and productive relationship with President Trump. Nawrocki now knows him, and that relationship will continue. So that actually will redound to Poland's benefit. That President Trump, who has always had a positive attitude towards Poland, will see a friend as his counterpart. So that is actually, I think, good for the bilateral relationship. I think that President Trump is also aware that Trzaskowski and the Tusk camp has a lot of people who don't particularly like him. And but of course, Poland is such an important country and is such an important ally, friend, and partner that our relationship will always be good with Poland, even if the government consists of people who have been very critical of President Trump, just because of the interest factor. However, the fact that Poland, that the president is now very favorably disposed towards the United States and the president, is going to redound to the benefit of the bilateral relationship, and it's also going to be good to have that channel when maybe some of the other channels might not be quite as vibrant. But I'm confident this will be a lot of which is basically a continuation of the way it's been, just with, in this case, different people in the presidential palace.
Thank you, Matt. Well, I got to say,
honestly, I would suggest
go ahead, John. You want to get the last word?
I do want to get the last word in, because I want to suggest here that, honestly, apropos Matt's comment about having a channel in Warsaw, if Mr. Nawrocki and the peace leadership that's around him knows how to play things well, they may find that here is an interlocutor that can also serve as a bridge between the United States and the rest of Europe, in the sense that he doesn't have the baggage of an Ursula von der Leyen, or necessarily the lack of trust of a Chancellor Merz.
Yeah, thank you, John. Listen, Producer Victor, as we get ready to wrap up, I just wanted to thank two of my really important friends and colleagues that I got to work with. A great blessing for me, John and Matt, to work with both of you at the State Department. I think two of our best experts on anything to do with Poland. So I'm so grateful that both of you took a few minutes of your time to share your thoughts. And I'm definitely going to be having you come back, because with a last name like mine, we talk about Poland a lot on this show. So I welcome you both to come back anytime. And Producer Victor, with that, why don't you send us on our way?
Absolutely. And thank you, gentlemen, for a truly insightful and well-informed conversation about Poland. I've learned a lot, and we're really honored to host experts of your caliber here on Top of Mind. So to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and of course, stay tuned for more engaging discussions coming your way.
In a world full of noise, clarity is power. Stay informed, stay aware, stay top of mind.